adding tweening and frame delay to animations in Photoshop. Remember, an animation is a series of frames, and we can see the timeline panel open down here at the bottom, and we see a series. There are 4 frames in this specific animation. So you want to pay attention to what's happening here, because the animation plays them very quickly to create that illusion of continuous motion. Each frame, remember, represents a major action point. So what we have happening are pictures flying by at a fairly quick rate. What we can add is called tweening. And tweening sort of blends that motion from frame to frame, and it makes it more fluid, because what it does is it adds frames in between the 2 changes of actions from one to the next. So tweening, actually, that term comes from an old job description, a person called an in-betweener. So we had the master illustrators. These were the people that were paid the big bucks, and they drew a starting position illustration and an ending illustration. And the in-betweener, who typically was some sort of an apprentice or sort of an intern kind of job, that artist drew the frames in between, thus in-betweener. So we had the master illustrator, and then we had the in-betweener. And the in-betweener, typically, to make a fluid motion, would draw 24 frames from one to the next, because typically illustrations, 24 frames per second. So 24 illustrations per 1 second of animation. So they really did all the work. Thankfully, we have computers to do tweening for us. So we can add tweening to this really basic frame animation. In the timeline panel, down here, we have a tween animation frame button. So I'm going to click, and it looks like a tail, kind of some shape that fades off into the distance. Tweens animation frames. So what this does, when I have my first frame selected, I have the option to enter the number of in-between frames that I want the tween dialog box to do. So frames to add. We'll just stick with 5. Of course, I have to specify what I tween with, if it's the last frame going backwards or the next frame going forward. I'm at the very first frame, so I can only go forward. I can choose if I want to tween all layers or only the selected layers. I can choose to change or tween the parameters. So I can choose the position, the opacity, or the effects that are applied to the layers. Okay, now in the frames to add, I can specify my number of how many I want to add between, in this case, frame 1 and frame 2. I can go all the way up to 999 frames in one single tween, which is quite a lot. So what is going to happen is that Photoshop is going to morph or blend from the first frame to the second. So watch down here, watch my timeline panel. When I click OK, here we go. So I had 4 initially, and now I have 9. Because what happens is, this is my starting. I added this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one. I added 5. This whole group here, and you can see now I have a gradual fade or a blend or a morph from my original frame 1 to right here was my original frame 2. And so I could continue this on. Let's continue this on and do a fade or a morph, a tween between 7 and 8 now. So I'll again go to my little tweening button. I'll keep it consistent by adding 5. I'm going with the next frame. I am going to change all those parameters. Click OK. And here we go. So now you can see that this one fades into this one. Now, the other thing that I need to adjust is my frame delay, because right now it says each one is for 0 seconds. It's going to fly really fast. So the frame delay is where we can adjust the length of time that each frame appears. And I can select for individual frames, I can select a frame delay, or I could do it for all. So I'm going to click on this one. If I use my little arrow here, I can get to my frame delay. So I can have no delay, 0.1, 0.2, 0.5, 1 second, 2 second, 5 second, 10 second, or other. So I can specify here. So let's do a 0.5 here. So this one stays up a little bit longer. And then let's go all the way here with this grouping. I select them all. I click the first, shift click the last. And let's do this a little bit faster at 0.2. And then I'll have my spring stay up for 1 full second. Okay. And then again, I can change if I want this looped. Let's loop this just once, or I could do it 3 times forever, or remember I can specify a number of times I want this animation to loop. One other thing to think about, and it's the pixel aspect ratio. Under the view menu, we have a pixel aspect ratio. And this is important because when you go from different resolutions on monitors, that ratio will change, and so this feature will automatically correct the ratio of the pixels displayed for the specific monitor in use. Probably a good idea just to leave it at square. Now if you're dealing with a video, you might want to play with some of these others, but for our simple animation, that's something that may potentially be on a web page, we're going to leave it at square. All right, so now let's preview it. We're just going to go back to our first frame here and click play. A word of warning, while you're working down here in the timeline, don't start messing with your layers panel because you'll make a mess real fast. Remember, anything that you do over here as far as turning things on, turning things off, moving things around, it's gonna change your entire animation. So it's a good idea to have this set before you start your animation. Have all your layers set and ready to go. Plan it out so that then when you start working with this timeline panel, you're not going back and tweaking and, like I say, making a big mess. Let's go ahead and play this animation. There it is. I'll play it one more time. Okay, so that's how we can start to do some real simple basic animations in Photoshop.